This video is about Bali and what I learned there. When I go on a long trip, my Sagittarian sun kicks in and it often becomes a giant learning curve. For me, these journeys can be like pilgrimages. It's the absorption of another culture that fleshes out the notion that the many in the one is everywhere. And I appreciate this diversity and the largeness of the world a lot more than is possible by staying at home. The world cannot be squashed into a postage stamp, and that is as it should be. Bali is no exception, as it defies labels and, despite the influx of tourism, manages to preserve its ancient culture. It has long had an impact on visitors who are amazed at its beauty and integration of life into nature. In fact, for me, it symbolizes a nexus of learning about sacred connections and paradise, at least in the imagination, as this is an island of ancient Hindu and even pre-Hindu practices, nestled among dozens of larger, more Muslim neighbors, and that makes it interesting on multiple levels for its resilience. In Bali, for example, there is a completely different system of astrology, not much known in the West. This system is based on the Tangan calendar, which follows the rice cycle and divides up the days using the numbers 10, 7, and 35, but in variable sequences. A year to the Balinese is 210 days, not quite a full year of 12 months. That might seem overly complicated, and to make it worse, not much is written about it, so finding any clear explanation is not easy. Asking Balinese people does not reveal much either. But with Uranus being retrograde, it sparked my curiosity, and I was spun into a vortex of new thoughts to consider this calendar, which is outside the box. And that could be a healthy way of modifying and adapting your worldview and not being fixated on the previous mental map, which we may need in the next few months. Not only does Bali not follow this Western system of astrology, it doesn't seem to be particularly influenced by the Indian and Vedic traditions, though you can see hints of this and even hints of the Chinese system all woven in to the Tangan. Because you have animal pictographs as in the Chinese system, and it uses the 5 elements, but even then it's not the same as the Chinese system. It's unique to Bali. And also what's interesting is its orientation. So to know your direction of north, south, east and west requires an orientation to the mountain. You should orientate yourself positioned in relation to either a sacred side of the island or a profane side. The North Pole, if you like, is therefore Mount Agung, which is central in Bali. That is the volcano, the central volcano. And what I find intriguing is how this exemplifies the relative nature of our mental maps and how you find what is the true north. So if, for example, you are north of Mount Agung, the sacred direction faces southwards. But if you live south of Mount Agung, the sacred direction is northwards. It's just a reminder of how relative these concepts are in relation to space and your position on Earth and these coordinates. And perhaps it's good not to get hung up on any one particular system. Houses in Bali, therefore, are built with this directionality in mind. The altars face Kaja, which is mountain wood, and the toilets or the animal pens face Kelod, which is seawood. And in one sense, this makes the entire island sacred. And in Bali, you become conscious not just of the elemental spirits, which can be intense at the abundance of rocks, forests, and waterfalls, but of which direction you're facing at any given point and what that means. And even the meaning of profane which is the seaward direction in Balinese Hindu culture, is not necessarily something to be loathed, avoided, or rejected, or even demonized. As in the Hindu world, light and shade, good and evil, yin and yang, must, by their nature, coexist. It is better to take it all in one, with good and bad in a mixture or an uneasy balance. That may be a struggle, but to try to banish one that you think is bad will not work, as it will bounce back in a kind of boomerang effect. What you resist persists. And any attempt to curse anyone could bring bad karma, as it's based on a mistaken view of the universe. And the payoff may not be how you imagine. To even ask locals about this system of astrology makes them uncomfortable, and they'll most likely change the subject. The feeling is that it should not be talked about at all, or astrology is a mystery only for a few, for those who have studied it, and it's not for the average person to comment. They might say that it's best to ask the Ida Pedanda, the Brahminic priest, as astrology is mingled in with black magic practices. The word for a healer or a priest is a Balian, which is not to be confused with a national from Bali. A Balian is a shaman who may or may not know the astrology. These Balians are usually men, though some women can be priests. They may not speak English, and even if they do, may choose not to divulge their knowledge to foreigners. I was told that there were many fake Balian shamans who just do it for the money. They pretend to heal, but the person coming has beliefs, and those beliefs may work the magic necessary. And it's all according to what the applicant thinks and believes about the experience. So these words, Sekala and Niskala, are important to understand this integration of the unseen forces in Bali. They translate loosely as Sekala, meaning the tangible, and Niskala, meaning the intangible, the seen and the unseen forces, which of course interact. This suggests that every Balinese person is familiar with the philosophy that nothing visible is without its invisible counterpart. Niskala, or the unseen occult forces, operate every day in daily life. This is why there are so many offerings of flowers and incense at the portals of every house and business. There are also numerous guardian deities such as Sangut and Melem, and other mythological characters that sit on either side of the doors on guard for who or what passes through. These gargoyle-like creatures are positioned there for protection and prosperity, and for not letting what does not belong through the doorway. There is also the Saka lunar calendar, where every month has 29 or 30 days, and begins on a new moon with the occasional extra month. It's very similar to our own concept, and from India, and this was developed in South India in 78 AD, and that became established on the island as well. But then there is, within this Peliling Tangan, the Pawakon calendar, which follows the rice cycles. The month has 35 days. 1 year of 7 times 35 days lasts 210 days. This has 10 different weeks, each of a different number of days that rotate in a coexisting cycle. That means some weeks, Tuesday for example, does not always follow Monday, but might have extra days inserted. And this calendar is used primarily for the timing of important ceremonies like the Galungan and Saraswati ceremonies. The astrological signs created from these calendars with this 5-day week and the 7-day week are cross-referenced into a grid and used to know which day is auspicious, but also which day can be selected for as a symbol for your bintang, which is your astrological sign. And that could include an animal symbol and a short description. I'll put the link for how to find your own Balinese astrology sign below the video. And just to show one example, for example, those born on September the 16th, 1989 are described like this in the slide. Really stubborn, but lucky and has a short memory, forgets issues, excellent capability of forgiving others for their faults, but expects the same level of courteousness from others, a complete slouch when it comes to your memory, but cautious and alert when it comes to money. A spendthrift, in other words. And so on and so forth. And you have an aspect, a day, a deity, an animal, a bird, and a symbol. And then 2 characteristics, for example, laku api, like the fire, so that relates to the elements. And modalities, you're very volatile and short-tempered. And the second characteristic, for example, satriya vibhava, open and enthusiastic and loves to enjoy life. And then just a little extra detail about the sign. So it's all fascinating and very interesting about birthdays. So this means that Balinese people have 2 birthdays, one by the international calendar, which was only imposed in 1945 when Indonesia gained its independence after World War II. Indonesia, by the way, is a Leo country established in August 17th. While Leo represents all of the Indonesian islands, it's not so easy to find a birth date for Bali in particular, yet the Leo aligns to the importance of their story, as that can be seen everywhere as Balinese are natural performers, dancers and musicians, with the kecak and legong dance ceremonies performed every week. And they are performed by entire village communities, and not just for those who train to do so. So it includes all of the people who helped create the dance, the event, the organization, the music, the costumes, and the masks. To me, there's also a Virgo feel about Bali. It has a flavor of India, only its own unique style in design, craft, sculpture, and in gardens, but all much more tidied up and more organized. And the famous legong dance is performed in Bali that requires 2 virgin girls to do the dance. So they're very young, and this dance includes very intricate high and leg coordination, which is described as exquisite. So the other birthday that the Balinese have is determined by this local Balinese calendar, the Pawakon. That's only if they know it. Many I asked do not know it, or may not only know one of their birthdays. And people do not really check the date or their zodiac sign or care to know about it. So it's not comparable really to the personalization you find from the tropical system or even the Vedic system, which uses both time and location coordinates as well as the day. But we might agree that everyone born on the same day might share at least some basic similar qualities. One of the problems with reluctance to know or share a birth date has to do with the prevalence of these black magic practices on the island. Locals say people are stirred by envy. Some people are willing to use a witch, a layak, to curse those they don't like. So in many cases, the recipient of this flow of malevolence is within the family, someone close who triggers those nasty feelings. Some go as far as blood sacrifices to curse people, and they use cockfighting for this, and cockfighting is very popular, and the cocks fight to the death. So here's where understanding karma can make a difference. As mentioned before, karma is just the consequences of any action, but it is for each person to work through the struggles with their inner demons and sift through their lower energies to transform them. To share a birthday with strangers, therefore, could give insight to the wrong people and be used against the person who shares it. That might explain why nobody wants to reveal it. The priests use astrology also to tell which kind of spirit inhabits the body of a child, and it's not always the obvious personality. I heard a story of the spirit of the grandfather inhabiting the body of a young girl for a period of 10 years. This might go some way to explain why that girl may tend to act in a temperamental or aggressive way. And then that behavior changes dramatically after 10 years, as if it is someone else emerging. Balinese people know the Bhagavad Gita, and it is the highlight of their holy scriptures, but they don't always follow its encouragement from Krishna to Arjuna to become detached from the shadow play of events that pass in any one lifetime, as their core essence does not change over many lifetimes. Let's say a person does not know their birth date, as no one recorded it, or has any memory of the circumstances. Now you can be creative. One Balinese man I encountered decided to DIY his own birthday. When the teachers asked him at school when his birthday was, he ran home to his father, who didn't know, so he decided on a September date, just out of sheer intuition, and ran back to the teacher and told him the date he had created. That date stuck with him on all the school records, and it was an intuitive leap of faith, and I can verify that he probably chose correctly, as all those Virgo qualities applied to him in abundance. For the sake of argument, some might say that, this can't be accurate, then you need the accurate birth time. You can't just invent your own birthday. But what if we could? Imagine that for a few moments. How different life could be. Less bound by fate, I dare say. The chosen birthday could have symbolic significance, like a personality by intention. One case in point is Walter Mercado, who, it appears, had two different birthdays. One that he had self-selected as a Pisces, and another that could be the accurate one, a Taurus. So it's another layer of astrology which relates to electional astrology, where you select the most auspicious date to embark upon any action to ensure its outcome. So again, that uses a magical worldview, but I also think if we could choose our birthdays this way, we would learn to live more easily with those gnarly bumps of personality instead of fearing them or complaining about them. We would align and adjust more with events that push us beyond fate into a chosen destiny. So there are many good reasons for doing what this man did. He took things into his own hands and charted his own universe. Now I want to talk about megaliths and temple architecture, as they are unique in Bali. We think of megaliths as prehistoric stone circles that stand out from the landscape and mark the Earth's energies, which aligns with the stars. But stones give off energy. They are not separate from the landscape, but are embedded at strategic points, and there is a fusion of knowledge in astrology and astronomy and architecture at one and the same time in these megaliths, which were aligned with the movements of the sun and the moon. Single stone menhirs do exist in Bali, as many ancient peoples lived before the Majapahit dynasty in Java. They are often on the site of temples, as the ground at those points is marked as holy. The position of these sites is therefore never random. There are mysterious stones usually at key temple locations, such as Gunung Padang, which appears to be a massive but collapsed giant pyramid, but this is in West Java. There are similar standing stones in Sanur in southeastern Bali. What are they? Why were they built? And by who? And how long have they been there? These are the questions that become difficult to answer. The highest temple in Bali is the Pura Tege Kahuripan near Kintamani, and it's lodged on Mount Penulisan, which is a mile above sea level, but the temple itself is 1,745 meters above sea level. It is described as a megalithic relic from an old Bali age and has inscriptions carved into natural rock formations and several Shiva Linga stones which represent the phallus. These can be identified astrologically as the sun, the pure life force. What is also special about this place is that the view at sunrise shows an alignment of the trinity of peaks. From the temple, there is a view of Mount Agung, Mount Batur, and Mount Abang, as all three can be seen together. This can surely be no accident. Stranger still are the ancient people of Bali Aga, who have unusual burial customs, which were possibly a remnant of pre-Hindu practices. They lived in, or still live in, the village of Trunyan, east of Lake Batur and on Mount Agang, and they worship a god called Bataratonta, connected to the Batur volcano. They do not bury their dead or do cremations as in most of the rest of Bali, but they wrap the corpses in a cloth and place them in a bamboo cage. The bodies are then left to decompose under a banyan tree. This particular tree has an aroma that prevents the smell of rotting corpses becoming noticeable. This practice derives from the pre-Hindu sect, the Agama Bayu, who worship the stars and the wind. Notice how temple architecture adapts to the landscape and marks sacred energy points on the psycho-socio-topography of the island. Each temple has a specific design and purpose, and its location is vital to understanding what is the purpose of the temple. Many are dedicated to certain deities like Dalim, a form of Shiva, and Saraswati, the goddess of arts, learning, music, and communication. She has similar qualities to Mercury and to Odin, and of course to the Muses. And one of the temples to Saraswati is in Ubud, is fronted by an enormous, tranquil lotus pool, which is very beautiful. But the main three temple types that stand out as unique to Bali are the Kayangan Jagad mountain temples, the Segara sea rock temples, and the Tirtha holy spring temples. The Kayangan Jagad or mountain temples are embedded into the slopes of the mountain, like Besaki or the Mother Temple on the slopes of Mount Agung, which, remember, is a volcano and the highest peak in Bali, so it is literally on the doorstep of the gods. The Segara sea rock temples, like the stunningly situated Tanah Lot and in the Uluwatu, take natural rock formations and venerate them with temple architecture and worship. And then the Tirtha temples are where the water source is holy, and they have at the center a holy pool marking that source, such as Pura Tirtha Impul near the village of Tampak Siring. This is a fine example, and the whole place is centered around the spring, which is venerated by doing ritual purification there. People stand under the water, pouring from sculpted openings, and cleanse themselves several times in strict procession. Non-Hindus are allowed to take part as long as they show respect for the ritual by wearing a sarong. For men, it is okay to have no shirt, and that was true for Balinese women over 100 years ago, when little was worn and children went naked, but the social norms have changed dramatically from that more innocent age, and now they must dress modestly in the water. Caves, too, became sacred spaces. One at Gajah is known as the Elephant Cave, and the opening is in the form of a demon's mouth, so you walk into a demon's mouth. Also, there are shrines built into the rock, like those at Gunung Kawi near the water temple. There is something about the whole island being marked, as it has a volcano at the center, which is the symbolic peak and home of the gods. So, as mentioned, there's no part of Bali that is not sacred in some way. It is called the Island of the Gods. The warmth and friendliness of the people go without saying, and it makes a very attractive place, which is at the same time a living mystery with a complex history that is well preserved. Niskala, that the unseen forces, is palpable everywhere, and to those who can feel it, that little psychic inside us all. All this elevates Bali into a place where manifestation seems to be more plastic, more available, faster to be realized. In Bali, the intertwining of the seen and the unseen is still appreciated by the locals, and is not just a throwback to pagan times. It's a refreshing and authentic world, especially to modern people who've become cynically jaded with their secular materialistic viewpoints, because with that viewpoint it suppresses these archetypal and atavistic energies, and at its peril. It may be that it is living near a volcano that does it. You have to incorporate the spirit world into your life or die in an eruption of molten lava, and that keeps the forces alive. It would always be a moot point to say whether life is better knowing astrology or without knowing it, but in Bali all their festivals and ceremonies are decided by their calendar, and the focus points are the temples. So this is a grand use of electional and topographical astrology. It is also bound up with the daily reality that people do not notice. It is by using the energy of the ancient stones and using this underlying concept of astrological significance of days and times that recognizes that some days are good and some days are not. All astrologers take this for granted. They choose the most propitious dates for events to take place, and that is woven into the fabric of life in Bali. They say knowledge brings grief, perhaps so, but as an astrologer, my personal preference is that it is better to know astrology than not to know it. But if you didn't know any astrology, would it make such a difference? You can still live a reasonably good life, but you might also be blinded to the workings of the cycles and of fate. And repeated behaviors produce difficult, tricky events, which would be a sign you are stuck. With astrology, you can ride the wave much better, but the Balinese live their lives by it, whether they know it or not, as all their festival dates are decided through astrology. Sometimes, however, astrology can become an obsession with technical language, and it forgets its purpose, which is to be embedded into life. It should relate authentically to life events and be part of that fabric. So at its worst, astrology can become mindlessly abstract and theoretical. I think it comes more alive when the synchronicities to a personal life are seen in parallel with this technology, and the as above matches neatly the so below in whatever way that seems like a miracle. Ubud is the World Chakra Center for yoga practice, and yoga is a good metaphor for this weaving of a philosophy into everyday experience. Real yoga, as it was intended to be understood, is not just postures. The asanas are the starting point to train the body to allow the mind to be still. So, perfection of poses is not the main goal. Yoga means union and imbibes this philosophy from Patanjali. What can be difficult, given we have a mind so easily distracted, is this seeking of union within your personal experience, especially in the everyday trials and tribulations, which tends to throw us off balance. What yoga does, hopefully, is to help you strive to maintain the complex equilibrium of effort, tension, and relaxation and ease within each event, so that you can happen to it and not that it happens to you or overpowers you. It is also mystical in the sense that the yogi seeks union with the divine in the everyday and being aware of karma, consequences and intentions, both conscious and unconscious. I was reminded of all this in Bali, and being there can feed you on that level of awareness of the time and date and location and how they all combine into an assemblage of experience. Now, this may have been the effect that Bali had on Charlie Chaplin when he visited in 1932. He was in crisis at that time, and this island restored his faith in humanity and soothed his soul. His locational astrology is interesting as it has the sun and the MC right through Hollywood, where he was the acknowledged master of silent film. But he was exhausted by all the politics of filmmaking. But in Bali, he was almost completely out of this limelight in a very low-key mindset, which was less stressful. And he realized this and wrote about it. He was fascinated by the Kecak dance, and there he was able to learn Balinese dance and music by just copying, and apparently he was able to do that. The nearest locational line on his locational chart has Jupiter and Chiron on the icy over in Timor, which is 722 miles east. So not that close, but he was in a quiet area, let's say, on his locational chart. It's interesting too to look at the two artists mentioned in Nigel Barley's book Island of Demons. They lived and breathed Bali in the 1930s, when it was less spoiled by modern life. Walter Spies was an artist and musician whose life became bound to raising awareness of art and culture in Bali. And a quick look at his astrolocation places Pluto to the east, but he also has the sun crossing Venus a few islands away. So this whole region of Indonesia was a revelation to him, as seen in his paintings, which present this intense magical reality, this fusion of the seen and the unseen that he experienced there. An added note that he was arrested for being German during World War II and put on a ship to Ceylon. It sank off Sumatra when Jupiter squared the North Node and Neptune was at 29 degrees of Virgo. He drowned that day in January 1942 with all the other prisoners, so he never got far from Bali even in his death. And this point on the sea there was close to his Uranus MC angle. And Rudolf Bonnet, who is the narrator of this book, also lived and adored Bali. His astrolocation is interesting as it shows he has his sun line placed just west of Singapore and the conjunction of Venus and Saturn lines towards Flores Island, which is east of Bali. So at least the sun and Venus enclosed Bali for him and gave him some of the finest days of his life, and perhaps he too felt bound to it, and with the Saturn there, it became a kind of discipline for him to work harder at his art in competition with Spies. So I went to Bali on a hunch that it would satisfy a calling for a place where the sacred is still taken seriously, and it certainly did that. In locational astrology, for me, Bali is roughly between my Neptune, Mars and Jupiter lines, and this might suggest that I would find yoga, spirituality and expanded philosophy. I've certainly had plenty of that. The dark side would be deceptions, accidents on motorbikes, or getting fat and lazy, or having an easy life. But if you strive for inner balance and don't go to excess, you can attract the more elevated style of these three archetypes as they coalesce together. So it leaves me wanting to find out more and to go back to Bali again. So thank you for listening. If you want any more information, please read the notes below this video. or go to my website, which is www.proteusastrology.co.uk. I'm happy to receive any email you want to send me at useastro@protonmail.com. And if you would like a reading, just get in touch with me. And until next time, have a wonderful autumn. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can put it together. Thank you.